In this episode of Ideas, I talk with Benjamin Hardy about his brand new book, Willpower Doesn't Work. Discover the hidden keys to success. I really like this episode with Ben. We talk a lot about the environment in which we're in and how setting up the correct environment can help us all win. And I am guilty of focusing more on the internal than the external. And it really challenged me, and I think this episode will challenge you as well if you're more geared to focus on the internal like I am. And I think you'll really enjoy this and get something out of it. All right, here we go. All right, today's guest is Benjamin Hardy. He is Medium.com's #1 writer, PhD candidate at Clemson University, and the author of the book he's here to talk about today, Willpower Doesn't Work. Discover the hidden keys to success. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show.
For sure, Adam. Happy to be here, man.
And before we dive into your book, and in the pre-interview there, I was telling you it really touched me because it was a different take on what works and what gets us to success. I wanted to kind of jump into your story because it's really interesting. The main thing being Medium.com's #1 writer, because there are so many people writing on that website. And I think it would be interesting for listeners to kind of hear your take on why you became a writer. How did you become the #1 writer on Medium.com for those trying to build a brand, to build a platform? I think it would be really interesting maybe to kind of share with that too. And then also your personal life. I know you have foster children. I heard from your assistant you're in the middle of moving to Florida. So just kind of a little bit about you and what it took to become Medium.com's #1 writer.
Of course. Yeah. So I started writing mostly actually in my journal. It was while I was serving a 2-year mission, like a church mission, and I was having all sorts of, pretty intense experiences helping people, serving in a community, just doing stuff that I had never done before. And I had read an article about how this lady had been writing in her journal for like 30 years and just all the life-changing benefits she got from it. And something about that really hit me. And so I started writing in my journal all the time, and I was already reading lots of books on this experience, whether that be religion, personal development, psychology, philosophy. But I started writing in my journal about my experiences and then just about what I was learning. And I got to the point where I was writing about an hour or two a day in my journal, and it got to the point where I could really write in kind of like a stream of consciousness, manner where I would sit down and write, and just all of a sudden the writing would like take me over, and it would just come out of me, and I didn't really know which direction it was going, and I just fell in love with it. I was getting all sorts of epiphanies, and it was just a powerful experience, stimulating experience. And so I was loving the books I was reading. I was going through all sorts of transformation myself and learning how to write. And it was in that time frame that I decided I wanted to become a writer. That was back in 2010. Then, I got home from this experience and jumped into college and studied psychology, kept reading lots of books, kept writing in my journal, anticipated that I would one day become a writer, but never actually having done that, and then in 2014, my wife and I, we moved to Clemson, South Carolina, and that's when I started my PhD in organizational psychology. And very shortly after, so that was, the fall of 2014, in January of 2015, we took in foster kids. We ultimately had 3 siblings, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And it was right around that time, early 2015, that I decided to start writing. And I actually, in the book Willpower Doesn't Work, explain how taking in foster kids kind of pushed me into doing that. It was a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility, and it forced me to introspect where I was at. It was, 5 years after I'd gotten home from that mission experience. I'd been wanting to be a writer for 5 years, been thinking about it, hadn't really done much about it. And so it kind of pushed me to really start thinking about it. And then I started investing a little bit. I bought a domain name. I bought a online course that taught me how to write blog posts. And I just started to educate myself about how to actually become a writer. I learned that I had to build an online platform, learned that I had to build an email list, all this stuff. And then I learned about Medium.com, and I started blogging on the internet in about April or May of 2015. And at the same time, I started writing on Medium, or just copy pasting my articles into Medium because I just heard about it, didn't really know much about it. But I mean, I don't really know why I became the top writer. And the reason I claim that spot is because for a while, actually for all the way up until about the last 6 months, they had a page that showed the top trending articles as far as page views, likes, and stuff like that. And my article, I always had several articles in the top 20, like way more than anyone. They've actually stopped that now. I think they're really trying to remove the competitive nature of it.
Hmm.
uh, but I mean, I still watch the other people who were doing pretty well. And as far as external numbers, it's, I can just tell that I'm still getting bigger numbers than anyone else on the platform. But I couldn't really explain how that happened. Is all I can explain is my
Hmm.
writing process
Sure.
itself, why I write the way I write, how I write the way I write. I just write about stuff that, for me, I'm a nonfiction writer, so I write about stuff that matters to me. I don't just try to find topics to write about. I only write about stuff that I'm living, experiencing, that I'm really drawing connections to, and I educate myself in ways way beyond books. I mean, I listen to and read lots of books, but I really try to push myself to understand it on an experiential level. And obviously, I learn from lots of different things. I'm almost done with my PhD in psychology. We're foster parents. We seek spirituality. Try to surround myself with people who are where I want to be. I'm open to failing at things, and so I try to educate myself from as many different angles as I can. And then I have performance routines and things like that that put me
Hmm.
into the mental place to actually just write in the way I want to write. I usually write early in the morning. Generally, it's, after I work out, after I've written in my journal. I usually write long before I ever jump into like email or social media and stuff. I just allow my creative brain the time, and I put myself into a pretty energetic, well, what I really try to do before I write is I try to put myself into the emotional place that I would want the reader to experience. And so if it's like motivation or excitement, like I would do whatever I could to get into that state so that I could write it from that energy. And one other thing I do is just I don't over edit myself. I just
Hmm.
write, and then
That's so important. Yeah.
I just write, and then I don't really tweak it. I definitely don't edit it along the way, and then I just go through and try to fix all the typos I can, and I kind of just publish what's there. So those are some of the things.
Yeah, and that really ties into kind of the angle you take in your book. You're creating this environment of motivation to help you write. But before we dive into the book, there's two things that kind of clicked for me when you were talking that I wanted to maybe dive into a little bit more. Where did you choose medium.com over, say, WordPress? When I built my blog years and years ago, it was WordPress was the big thing. Was Medium.com the big thing for you? The audience was already built into Medium. There was already an audience there, so that's why you picked Medium.
I mean, I had a WordPress website,
Uh-huh.
benjaminhari.com. It's no longer built on WordPress anymore. Now it's hosted, it's built on ClickFunnels. But yeah, I mean, I kind of had the idea or the epiphany, like, I could blog on my own website, but no one's really there. And that's kind of what happened. I
Mm-hmm.
posted there for like the first month or two, and it's like, I don't know anything about SEO. I don't have a pre-existing audience. I mean, I can share my articles and stuff, links to them on Facebook and stuff, but I get like 2 or 3 views. And then I, look at places like Medium or LinkedIn or Quora, and there's already millions of people there. And so you can kind of already tap into that platform that's already pre-existing, which, one of the concepts I talk about in Willpower Doesn't Work is that every context or every environment has different rules and caps and opportunities. And, if I was to create a new context or a new environment being my website, there's not really much opportunity. I mean, there's sky's the limit, I guess, but there's not a lot of pre-existing leverage.
Yeah.
Whereas on somewhere like Medium, you jump in and there's already a lot of leverage. You can get into lots of different people's news feeds. There's already millions of people seeing the website every day. They've already done a lot of the front end work. And so I just decided to just, I didn't really think about it. A lot of this is retrospect at this point, but I mean, I just was able to tap into that and get virality pretty quick. It was just kind of, a lot of it was right place, right time, but also it was just like the platform was already built, and I just wrote in the way I wanted to write. And I obviously was studying stuff. I was studying, I took the online course, I was practicing, I was studying stuff that was working. I was studying virality. So it's not like it was purely an accident. I took my own writing style and I framed it in a way that, it works, like list style articles and stuff, or, using quotes and science and speaking in a particular tone. I mean, I write what I want to write in the way I want to write it, but I also frame it and structure it in a way that it has the best shot at doing well.
And I think that's really important for listeners, maybe if they're building a platform right now or thinking about jumping into it. It gives us something to think about for sure. And the other thing, as you were talking, that kind of struck me was the thought of you becoming a writer. Do you think that everyone should write? Do you think everyone is a writer? What's your take on that? If somebody listening has been thinking about starting to write, would your best advice be to just start writing? Dive into that maybe a little bit, if you would.
So I don't think that everyone is or should be a writer in the traditional sense. I do think that everyone very much could benefit from journaling, from the act of writing, especially with pen and pad, just getting your thoughts on paper, which is detailing a history of your life or of your experiences, of your thoughts, or writing down your goals and making plans for your future, or just, I mean, I find a lot, there's so many, scientific benefits to journaling, whether that's emotional healing, relationship healing, or just clarity. And I mean, so I
Mm-hmm.
do think that the act of writing is something that is very healthy, even if it's not like in a professional or a public manner. And so, from that perspective, yes, I think that writing is something that could benefit anyone. And I think that it's a skill that pretty much anyone could develop if they wanted to. I also think that if people got really into journaling, that it could potentially lead to a desire to write in different fashions, which is what really happened to me. As far as, your second question, which was, I believe, related to people who potentially want to start writing online or building an online platform or becoming professional writers. I guess your question was, what's my advice?
Yeah, I mean, like, do you just suggest for them to start writing? Is that the best advice you have for them?
Uh,
Or is there something else?
I don't know. I mean, one of my favorite quotes when it comes to writing is that it's better to be prolific than perfect. And so
Hmm.
obviously, and another one is like to have strong opinions loosely held, and
Hmm.
so it's this idea that a lot of people don't start writing because they don't feel like their ideas are fully formed or that they're strong enough or that, they're still learning. And, there's a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he said basically that it's the rate of a high intelligent mind to be able to hold two opposing ideas at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And why that matters is because it's okay if your writing changes over time. It's okay if you actually disagree with what you said like 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, if you're not growing and evolving, then that's not necessarily a good thing. There's a really good book out now called On Grand Strategy, and it's all about how, the smartest people, the most successful ones are the ones who are willing to change their minds. There's another book that's not similar, but it's on a similar idea. It's called Persuadable. But
Hmm.
basically, so the people who aren't willing to change their minds, let's just say they have an idea about some idea about how the world works. Like in my case, that I believe willpower doesn't work. And by the way, it's actually common, knowledge that willpower is something that's useful and, that you should do. Actually, when I was going into my PhD program, I wanted to study willpower. But through experience and things like that, and through different angles and lenses of thought, I changed my mind. And I'm also open to the fact that I could change my mind again. And basically, people who get stopped along the way, they have some bias towards the world and they stop opening themselves to new information that would allow them to change their mind. And instead, they just keep digging themselves deeper and deeper into a intellectual hole or into like some perspective that they have rather than being willing to just openly change your mind and stuff and being more free and open. And so,
Yeah.
I guess one advice I would have is just, wherever a person is, like you can start writing from that perspective. But, the challenge, if you want to continue to be relevant or useful or helpful, is to not stay where you're at. Like
Hmm.
let yourself and your writing evolve and change over time as you change and seek that change. So, I mean, that's my thought. But, I think that the person will start writing when they're truly ready.
Hmm.
And
That's really good.
you know what I mean? And
I
like
like that. Yeah.
if they're not ready, you can get yourself ready. A lot of that is, like you said, to start writing. But I think that if someone's serious about becoming a writer or a creative or whatever, they have to reach some point where they have to do it. And, I've spent plenty of time thinking about how do you get to that point. I've written about it. I've thought about it. I talk about it a lot in Willpower Doesn't Work, as far as like financial investment, putting yourself in situations. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's all really good advice. And you just started talking about willpower doesn't work, and I really want to just go ahead and dive into it because I followed you on Medium, followed your work and saw the success that you were having there, and then saw that the book was coming out. And with a title like Willpower Doesn't Work, I was like, wow, this looks really interesting. So I picked up the book, and it definitely was. And with a title like that, big and bold on the front cover, Willpower Doesn't Work, I just want to start off by asking, why doesn't willpower work in your opinion?
Well, willpower is a very individualistic thing. It's looking at one. I guess I'll just start with context. So, like, we live in an exponentially changing world right now. The world is changing so fast. We're bombarded by infinite options, infinite websites, infinite information, infinite, never has there been a time in history where we had so much choice. And with a lot of that choice, most of it is bad choices, which is why most of us are so distracted now, right? It's hard to actually find the signal among all the noise now. And another word for willpower, or another scientific term or definition, would be decision fatigue. Basically, what it means is that the more decisions you make, the worse those decisions become. And this is why people like Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs would wear the same clothes every day, is because the less decisions you make, the better brain power, whatever you have towards making important decisions. If you can outsource and automate and remove most of the decisions that aren't that important from your life, then you can actually focus on the things which matter. And before the world was at our fingertips, we didn't have as many options. I mean, if you even think about women in society are doing very well, as far as academics and business and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say that women have more willpower than they did 150 years ago. I would say they have more options, right? They're in an environment that provides them more choice. But with a lot of that choice comes distraction and difficulty. There's a book called The Paradox of Choice, and basically what it means is that if you have too many choices, you usually can't make any good ones, or it's harder to make the good ones. And so,
Mm-hmm.
because of all this choice, option, confusion, willpower goes away very fast. It depletes very quickly. It's like a muscle, it just exhausts very fast for most people. And so there's a reason why most people are distracted and addicted and numbed, is because it's just too intense at this point. I mean, addiction rates are like doubling, tripling, every year. And we already know that everyone spends a gross amount of time distracted on the internet and bombarded by stimulants. I mean, energy drinks, all of these things. The Industrial Revolution brought about all the overstimulating non-natural foods. And so basically what we're living in this dopamine rich environment that's just
Mm-hmm.
just blowing our brains up. And basically what it means is that people are becoming very reactive to their environment. It's just one dopamine hit after another. And what does all this do? It drains the willpower. So rather than trying to combat this intense, overstimulating, intense environment, which is impossible, I would say the smartest people out there are the ones who basically shield themselves from most of this. They have systems in place. They make choices. You create an environment that allows you to not have to deal with most of this stuff. Marshall Goldsmith said, if we do not create and control our environment creates and controls us. And that's basically, most people are being created and controlled by the environment. They're becoming whatever the environment is leading them to, rather than creating an environment that shapes them into the people they want to become. And so the book, Willpower Doesn't Work, is all about how to strategically and systematically create an environment that allows you to be the person you want to be. You can either be in a stream that's pulling you the direction you want to go, or you can be swimming upstream. And most people are swimming upstream, which is why it's very exhausting on the willpower side. If you're in a stream that's taking you the direction you want to go, you don't need to use willpower because the environment's pulling you forward.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of books talk about changing what's on the inside, and what you're more saying is focus on the outside as well. What do you think comes first? Are you saying to fix the outside, your environment that you live in, and then the inside, or is it simultaneously that we're focusing on both? What does that look like?
This is like the question, what comes first?
Yeah.
Zig Ziglar said, He said, if you change your inputs, you change your outlook. If you change your outlook, you change your outputs.
Mm.
If you change your outputs, you create success. And so basically, I really do think, obviously, we all have different DNA and stuff like that, but I really think that it's your inputs. Anyone who changes their thoughts and their beliefs, those usually had to come from somewhere. Like the people who are
Mm-hmm.
telling you to change your thoughts and stuff, they're the ones who are giving you the books that are helping you do it. And so you have to get those ideas from somewhere.
That's
And
good.
so
Yeah.
my take is that this is why Western thinkers are so individualistic is they think that things exist outside of context. Like a context has to exist in order to plant plants or in order to plant vegetables and stuff. You have to have the garden first.
Mm-hmm.
And so the garden must exist in order for plants to be there. The plants can't exist without the soil. And so most people just look at the plant in isolation rather than saying, well, it couldn't exist without a certain type of environment. All of the ideas we have about success and innovation and things like that, they happen because that's the world we now live in. If we lived 400 years ago, the ideas wouldn't be the same. But you got to realize that who you are is primarily made up of what's around you, the relationships, the expectations, the beliefs, the commitments, all of these things are what make you who you are. And so if you really want new ideas, new beliefs, new expectations, you've got to put yourself in a new environment and a new situation. There's actually a quote that I recently came across that I would have obviously included in the book if I would have known about it. But the quote is from Mark Cain, but he said, "The first step toward success is taken when you refuse to be a captive of the environment in which you first find yourself."
Mm. That's
So the first,
good.
yeah,
That's
so the
really good.
first,
Yeah.
yeah, I saw that on an Inc. article. So the first step toward success is taken when you refuse to be a captive of the environment in which you first find yourself. What's interesting is like, when you find something, you start to see it everywhere. So I saw that quote, and then I just listened to a John Maxwell book, and he used this same quote in his book. And he talked about, he's got a section in his book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. And one of the top laws is the law of environment. And he talks all about how, even if you're successful, you need to change your environment if you want to continue to become increasingly successful, because every environment has a cap. Once you max out, like with a certain mentor, you need to go get a new one. That's why the quote says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is truly ready, the teacher disappears. Because if you're truly adaptive in learning, you're going to reach a cap on something, and then you have to go and start over and learn something new. Dan Sullivan, the strategic coach founder, said, as soon as you arrive, it's time to start over. And so you can only go so far in a given environment, and then you need a new one with new options, new opportunities, new challenges, new growth. But I think that context matters. In some situations, like actually in the book The Art of Learning from Josh Waitzkin, he talks about competing principles, about how in certain contexts one principle overrules the other. And I think in our world right now, obviously mental creation, which is what you're talking about, where your thoughts become things, is clearly a true principle. What you're asking and what I'm asking is, well, where did the thoughts come from? And what Zig Ziglar would say, and I agree with him, is those thoughts came from inputs. They came from something outside of you. They didn't just materialize out of nothing. Thoughts and ideas definitely shape and reshape based on the soil. So your mind could be the soil, and then you get inputs, and then the soil changes those inputs into something different. That's basically where the whole becomes different from the sum of the parts. And so, once the thought becomes a thought, it could be kind of original, but it came from something outside of you, and then how you interpreted it. So, I mean, it's complex and interesting,
Mm-hmm.
but given the situation we're in right now, I think I agree with Marshall Goldsmith, especially in today's world where the environment is so stimulating and it's coming at us extremely, that if we do not create and control our environment, then we're going to get created and controlled by something else.
It forces us all we need to be very selective. There's so much content to consume. If you're doing it right, I think it forces you to be selective because there's just not enough time in the day to read all the blogs or listen to all the podcasts. So maybe that's some good that comes from it. But in your research for the book, did you ever cross anybody that thought that they were in a work environment? That's the one environment that comes to mind here, that they felt they couldn't change And did you have any advice for those people, or did you have any thoughts about that idea? If someone feels that they can't change their environment, is the best advice to leave that environment, or do you have something else on that?
When it comes to work or even bad relationships, I mean, I've talked to people who are in like really bad marriages, for example, and like
Yeah.
the spouse just isn't changing. And so is the only option to leave? I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that question. I do know that certain situations are far less flexible than others. And sometimes stepping away is absolutely what a person needs to do, even if it's temporarily. Because one thing that people need to realize is that they are a contributing factor into what the environment is. So if a person is, in a negative relationship, that relationship is a pattern and they are contributing to that pattern. They can stop contributing to that pattern as well. Even if that means just completely stepping away from it and disrupting the pattern and just putting up new boundaries. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to a job, I think that a job is a lot different than, being in a tough marriage. I think that if you're in a job that you don't have the freedom you want, and if you truly believe you've done everything you can to change the situation, whether that be talking to your boss, trying to take on more responsibility, being more proactive. I mean, doing all these things where you can potentially change the situation, or seeking different opportunities. If you just feel like you are literally stuck and that nothing's going to change, then why wouldn't you just leave? Like, there's so many amazing jobs out there now. There's an infinite number of jobs out there now. And we live in like the gig economy now where you can create your own jobs now working from your phone. And so if you're in a job where you're stuck and like literally you've done everything you believe you can and it's just frozen, then like you're done. Like why would you do that? Like there's
Yeah.
so many other options.
Right. And I think a lot of times quitting has this negative context, when a lot of times quitting is sometimes your best answer. I hate to say only answer, but a lot of times it's the best answer. Um, and kind of wrapping up here and going back to that last question, you saying context is so important. It is. I mean, without knowing the exact situations, you hate to give advice, and advice is really hard for that reason. But wrapping up here, if there's one big takeaway that you'd like to leave listeners with today, and maybe those people that are going to go out and pick up your book, everybody definitely needs to do that, because it changed my perspective. And I try to bring people on this show who will change our perspectives. Even if we don't grab hold of those perspectives, as we've already talked about, it's good to at least listen to those ideas and form our own thoughts and opinions on those things, not to be told what to do and have those opinions for the rest of our lives. We're always evolving, always learning, and it's so important to always be growing. And I think that's what all of us are trying to do. But if there's one final takeaway that you'd like to leave listeners with today of your book, Willpower Doesn't Work, what would that be?
Yeah, so basically the idea is if you do not shape your environment, it will shape you. I've come
Yeah.
to know that's true. And when you become a conscious creator of the person you want to be, you do that by shaping an environment. You do that by
Mm-hmm.
putting yourself in situations. And so you shape the situation that shapes you. Winston Churchill said, "We build our houses and then our houses build us." Marshall McLuhan said, "We shape our language and then our language shapes us." For people listening to this, you're thinking in terms of the context of English, which has constraints. It's like you're not independent of English, unless you are, but I'm not. I can't necessarily think outside of the realm of English, and so I'm bound by that context. Um, if I learned a different language, I'd have different opportunities. But anyways, it's just this idea that you're shaped by an environment, and if you want to purposefully transform yourself, you do that by shaping an environment, and you can do that. It's proactive. It is choice. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that you have no choice. I'm saying you do have choice, but you have to choose the things that influence and shape you. You have to be discriminate. You have to choose what influences you, and you have to choose how you influence what's outside of you. And so that's just my thoughts.
And really good thoughts. And Ben, that's what was really different about your book, is that, I focus a lot on the inside, and I probably don't put enough emphasis on the outside. And your book really changed that for me and changed my perspective. And yeah, I learned a lot from your book, and I think readers will as well when they go and pick that up. So, last question for you, Ben. Where would you like to send people to find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, you can just Google Benjamin Hardy. You'll find my work on, medium.com, or you can just go to benjaminhardy.com.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of these ideas. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.